The desert had a way of listening, of holding its breath, and that evening it listened as the Apache man stood bound to a cottonwood at the edge of a dry arroyo. His wrists raw from rope, his shoulders bruised from blows meant to teach a lesson rather than kill him outright. For the men who had dragged him here wanted the land itself to finish what their hatred began, wanted the wild beasts to do the work so they could ride away clean and tell themselves they had merely left him to fate. And fate, they believed, favored them. His name was Nalin, a scout once trusted by both tribes and townsfolk, now accused of a theft he did not commit, and as the sun sank and the heat bled out of the stones, he tested the knots with a patience born of survival, feeling the give and knowing it would not be enough before night called in its hunters, while memories of his mother's voice and the rhythm of the drum circled him like moths to a flame, and somewhere beyond the mesquite, coyotes began to tune their throats. It was then that Eleanor Hart rode into the shallow wash, her mare stepping careful and soft, a frontier woman with dust on her skirts and resolve in her spine, drawn by the sound of argument she had overheard at the trading post hours earlier, whispers about an Apache left for the cats. Whispers that had set her jaw because Eleanor had learned the hard way that truth rarely rode with whispers, and she carried her father's old rifle across her saddle like a promise. She saw him, before he saw her, the way the last light touched his hair and the way his eyes, dark and steady, met the dying sun without fear, and she felt that thud in her chest that came when the world asked you who you were going to be tonight, a witness or a coward. A low growl rolled from the brush and Eleanor froze, lifting the rifle, the front sight finding the shape of a mountain lion easing forward, muscles coiled, hunger patient, and in that breathless instant she did not think of the talk in town about dangerous savages or the warnings meant to keep women small. She thought only of the man tied to a tree who had been denied a fair chance, and she squeezed the trigger, the crack of the shot tearing the quiet open, the lion tumbling and then lying still, the echo ringing like a verdict. Nalin flinched at the sound but did not close his eyes, watching her with something like wonder and caution braided together, and when the dust settled, Eleanor dismounted, her boots sinking into sand, her hands steady as she cut the rope, the fibers rasping and giving way, and for a heartbeat they stood close enough to hear each other breathe, two strangers stitched together by a decision. He did not thank her right away, because among his people gratitude was shown in actions, but he inclined his head, a warrior's nod, and said simply that she had called him back from the dark, which made her swallow hard because she had not realized how close he had been to leaving. They moved quickly then, because death has a way of sending invitations in multiples, Eleanor leading him to a narrow cleft she knew, a place where the wind sang low and the rocks held warmth, and as they went, he told her in halting English about the horse that had gone missing, about the men who needed a culprit more than the truth, about how he had been a bridge once and bridges are burned by both sides when the river rises, and Eleanor listened, because listening was her rebellion, because her father had taught her that a rifle could stop a body but only listening could stop a lie. Night came down fully, stars spilling like salt, and they shared water and a strip of dried meat, and Eleanor cleaned the rope burns with the careful hands of someone who had stitched herself up more than once, and when a shadow moved near the mouth of the cleft, Nalin rose silently, positioning himself between danger and the woman who had saved him, which told Eleanor everything she needed to know about the man he was. At dawn, they rode together toward her homestead, not because she believed in miracles but because she believed in momentum, and momentum required daylight and witnesses. And along the way they were tracked by men who did not like loose ends, men who rode hard and cursed harder, and when the first bullet kicked up dust near Eleanor's mare, Nalin did not hesitate, sliding from the saddle and returning fire with the rifle she handed him, his aim precise, not to kill but to stop, to send a message that the hunted had become the defender, and when the pursuers broke, Eleanor laughed, a bright, disbelieving sound, and Nalin smiled for the first time. A small curve that made the desert seem less sharp. At the homestead, Eleanor's neighbor Mrs. Calder saw them and said nothing, which in frontier terms was a blessing, and over the next days the truth came the way truth often does, slow and stubborn. A horse found tangled in a ravine, tracks telling a story that did not match the accusation. A guilty man drinking himself into confession, and when the town realized what it had almost done, it tried to call it an accident, tried to look away, but Eleanor would not let them, standing in the square and telling the story from beginning to end, her voice steady, her eyes bright, naming the lie and naming the courage it took to end it. Nalin was offered apologies that felt like coins pressed into a wound, and he accepted what mattered and left the rest, choosing instead to work the borderlands again, to rebuild trust plank by plank, and Eleanor rode with him sometimes, not as a savior but as a partner, learning the names of plants and the language of wind, learning that bravery is not loud but it echoes. Seasons turned, as they do, and the desert remembered the sound of a rifle shot that had meant life, and when people asked Eleanor why she had risked herself for a man tied to a tree, she would shrug and say that the question told you everything about the problem, and when people asked Nalin about the woman who had fired the bullet, he would say she had listened before she aimed, which is rarer than gold. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe that one choice can bend a whole horizon, then don't ride past. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where courage meets consequence, where love and justice find each other in the dust, and where every episode reminds us that sometimes a single, well-aimed decision can save a life and change a world.